So on October 3rd, the day before conference started, the Salt Lake Tribune put out an opinion piece written by scholar Taylor G. Petrey, who is the author of the book Tabernacles of Clay, which is kind of a pride movement advocacy book. And this piece is a pride movement advocacy. And we'll go through this opinion piece here in the Tribune as we contrast it to what Elder Rasband and President Oaks said about the Family Proclamation in conference. It's very interesting. Here's the subtitle. Well, here's the whole title, right, for the Tribune opinion piece. It says, the LDS Church's Family Proclamation is commentary, not revelation, right? It's commentary, not revelation. And here's the subtitle. The document should be seen as part of an evolving debate, right? Of course, he wants it to be an evolving debate because he wants it to be loose enough that it can change to what he wants it to be, right? An evolving debate about family, gender, and marriage that reflects the values of its era, right? So 30 years ago, we have just passed the 30-year mark of the Family Proclamation. So it's just commentary. I mean, come on, we should come up with another proclamation on the family that today, that would be commentary of today's views, which Mr. Petrey here and the Salt Lake Tribune would say are very different, but not as far as doctrine goes, not as far as some core principles of the church go. And those things are not going to change. They're not going to move despite your arguments in this piece here. By the way, this episode is brought to you by a movie that I saw last night. It is very, very good. It's put out by Angel Studios. It is called Truth and Treason. It comes out October 17th. That's a Friday. It is coming out in about half of all movie theaters across the country. It is top notch. This is not one of those LDS films or LDS produced films that's like, hey, just go see it to support it. And it's kind of good and interesting. That's not the case here. This is top-notch acting. Really is. This is top-notch direction and directing. And this is top-notch production all the way around. I thought it was excellent. A young teenage boy caught in a world of Nazi Germany as a Latter-day Saint boy going to church. And they're all part of this culture of Nazi Germany. What do you see? What are the mists of darkness around you? How do you walk that edge of the sword between, well, I'm a German. Most everyone around me here is supporting Hitler and still wanting to have the truth and understanding what's happening with the Jews and the tyranny of Adolf Hitler. It's a remarkably well-produced movie with some tension in it that's very interesting, that I thought was revealing and very important. So go see this movie, Truth and Treason. It is at a theater near you, Friday, October 17th. Okay, now back to this. So a commentary, not revelation. And I want to split this again here, and I do this often because I think it's an important thing to do. What is the Pride movement? What is the Pride movement? There's a very big difference between the Pride movement and someone, let's say, that has a gender dysphoria or that has same-sex attraction. That doesn't necessarily mean you're part of the Pride movement. The Pride movement, the identitarian agenda, is well beyond that. And that agenda is a movement to destroy family and destroy identity, period. When you get down to the fundamentals of all this, that's exactly what it is about. And this piece here in the Salt Lake Tribune is exactly that. That's exactly what it represents. It's not about supporting someone and loving someone that has same-sex attraction or gender dysphoria. It's about trying to push away from family, the traditional family, trying to push away from traditional marriage, the role of parents, and it's, in the laboratory that is a traditional family. And that is the agenda. And it's out there everywhere. So when someone says you're a homophobe or a transphobe, that is not the case, even if you're against the Pride movement, because that's not really what the Pride movement is. The Pride movement is right here on display, trying to interpret something very differently, to downplay the idea of traditional marriage and a traditional family. When I say downplay, that means destroy or lower the credibility, to de-emphasize, right? So I want to go right into these two talks here from Elder Rasband and Elder our President Oaks, because they're very telling and very important to see how this is developed, the Family Proclamation, and what it's trying to say. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the specifics of the proclamation. I've done that several times. That's not what this is about. This is what the proclamation is and what it represents. So let's go here first to Elder Rasband. Out the door.
By divine design, this proclamation, with its revelatory words, was created to maintain and strengthen the family as the fundamental unit of society. Okay,
now he's talking about things that are eternal here. And this is an important thing, and it goes against the argument of Petrey in his opinion piece, right? This is about doctrinal issues. This is about eternal principles. And so he's trying to show that. This is a revelatory document, is what he says, right? Let's see what else he says.
Most importantly, each of us are, as the proclamation states, a beloved spirit son or daughter of heavenly parents with a divine nature and destiny.
Okay, I want to say something here again, because the Pride movement fights against this, and that is your identity. And President Nelson went over this a couple of years ago with his what I call his identity hierarchy, right? Again, the top one is you are a child of God, you are a child of the covenant, and you are a disciple of Christ. What the Pride movement says is, that line that would be into those three identities, it says, no, I want to take your other identities, which we all have. I want to take your same-sex attraction. I want to take your sense that you are of a different gender. I want to take your race, your economic status, whatever it is, right? Your ethnicity, and go in, and I want to take it, I want to raise that up to the very top. That's what the Pride movement tries to do. That's what identitarianism is it wants to change the hierarchical structure of your identity and remove those others or lower them so that everything you see is through a filter of race or is through a filter of sexual orientation or of loose gender, right? It's a very pernicious way to attack a central idea and concept of Christianity and of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, founded right here, not founded, but is found right here in the Family Proclamation.
When I was called to the Holy Apostleship in 2015, I was advised, this proclamation is now yours. Your name, pointing to the words, Council of the 12 Apostles, in the title, is right here.
Okay, again, I want to say this. We have a sense in some circles of the church that we think that, wow, even if you're not for a change in the proclamation, even if you're not for a change in temple marriage, that, wow, oh no, what's going to happen here? Maybe the church is bending a little bit toward this. And maybe people like Petrey and others that talk about this change and have this great hope. There are large organizations out there within the church, not church sponsored, but large Latter-day Saint organizations that push this idea that all of this is going to change if we would just wait a little bit longer, let these old men die off that were involved, especially with the Family Proclamation, then we'll get this change that we're looking for. It's so pernicious. It's so horrible because what it does is it takes someone, say a young gay man, and he says, oh, okay, well then I'm just going to go ahead and break the law of chastity anyway, because eventually God is going to say it's okay. He's going to sanction it within the church. And I can hope for that, and I can celebrate that. And so I'm going to do it. Instead of supporting that individual in something that follows a covenant path toward exaltation. And so it's very pernicious. And you can see a number of people that are that have same-sex attraction that have gone away from that, let's call it a gay lifestyle, because they are holding on to their covenants. And they have a burden to bear, and many of us have a burden to bear. But they have a specific burden to bear, and they choose their covenants over everything else. Right? So understand that as he's brought in here as an apostle, he is told, own it. They are not going to change the Family Proclamation. They're not going to change temple marriage. It is not just doctrinal, as some people say, well, it's doctrinal, but doctrine changes. These are eternal truths. They're eternal truths. And they're not going to change. And everything about our gospel is founded on this idea of exaltation, right? That is the entire objective. Even the atonement of Jesus Christ, even the atonement is a means toward exalting man. When I say exalting, I mean helping men and women become more like God, become more righteous. The work and glory of God is to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of man. The work of the atonement is for that. The church is for that. They are not going to change this. And so if you are somewhere on the fence on this and you're just not sure and you're wondering, because there are so many loud voices with social media and the internet that try and pull you in different directions and say, no, go ahead. Everything's going to be fine. It's okay. Don't do it. Don't do it. Stick to the law of chastity. Stick to your temple covenants. The Lord will bless you. Okay, let's go on with Elder Rasband here.
The proclamation has a divine origin.
Divine origin.
So we must treat it with the reverence deserving words from God. Let me give you some background about the proclamation as a core message of what we believe. In 1994, a year before the proclamation was presented, the Quorum of the 12 Apostles discussed how society and governments were pulling away from God's laws of family, marriage, and gender.
Okay. So this is where it comes from. And you're going to hear a lot of people say, oh, this isn't divine. It's not revelation. This is a political message. And it is a political message because sometimes revelation is political. The whole Book of Mormon is political, right? But they'll try and downgrade it to something that is not divine and that does not have a divine origin by saying it's simply a political document where they were trying to fight against some movements that were going on with what was first Proposition 2 in California and what was going on in Hawaii with same-sex marriage. And it's true. That is what was going on. That is the environment. And as Elder Rasband said, as society is moving away from these principles, these eternal principles of family and marriage, they're getting very concerned because these things are starting to be moved to a place legally where not just policy, not just cultural acceptance and tolerance, but law will be put into place. And this is still what we're fighting today. This is still what President Oaks is out trying to fight all the time. At least to cover the institutions, at least maybe not individuals, but to cover the institutions. He's still trying to fight this. So that's where this comes from, right? This is what spurs the idea of having to get this Family Proclamation put out. It is what is happening in the world around us. And we want to be very clear on what the church supports and what the doctrine of the church is. Now, I love the quote that he brings up here from President Hinckley.
With so much sophistry that is passed off as truth, with so much of deception concerning standards and values, with so much of allurement and enticement to take on the slow stain of the world, we have felt to warn and forewarn of standards, doctrines, and practices relative to the family, which the prophets, seers, and revelators of this church have repeatedly stated throughout its history.
Throughout its history, again, the sophistry that we're getting here is what President Hinckley called it. And it's the same thing we're getting in this an opinion piece. It's the same thing that we get from certain pride advocates and identitarian advocates that you find inside of the church, right? Inside of the church, sometimes sitting up on your stage. And the sophistry is very difficult to maneuver through. But this is bedrock eternal truth, the family. It is what we get in Genesis, which is a temple liturgy, essentially, that we're getting with Adam and Eve. It is man and woman being married, having kids, multiplying and replenishing the earth. This is one of the primary purposes. It is the purpose. And yes, some people don't have the opportunity to participate in that in this life. And they're going to participate in the next. They will have that. And everybody is invited to the gospel. Everybody is invited to the fullness of the blessings of exaltation and all of the blessings that go along with that at some point in their eternal existence. But the sophistry is as real today as it has ever been. It is worse today than it has ever been. And unfortunately, as was not as much the case in 1995, within the church, we are hearing those voices stronger and stronger of sophistry that are trying to devalue the family proclamation, that are trying to devalue traditional marriage and a traditional family.
When presented, the proclamation did not align with the views of many in the world. Not then, not now.
Not now.
There are those who take issue with the declaration on family, marriage, and gender. Some suggest the church pull it back, revise, or even set the proclamation aside.
It's just commentary.
The proclamation on the family is, as President Hinckley stated, doctrine, my dear.
Whoa, okay. So again, right here, let me go back to the title of the Salt Lake Tribune. Here it is, opinion. The LDS Church's family proclamation is commentary, not revelation. Commentary, not revelation. We've been hearing throughout this whole talk with Elder Rasband that this is a revelatory document, that it is doctrine. And again, I will say furthermore, it is chock full of eternal truth, which does take you beyond doctrine. And there will always be people that take issue with it. In fact, that group is probably going to grow. That group is going to grow, and there is going to be more and more of a distinction. This is going to become more and more of a lightning rod, a watershed document that is going to have people coming down one side or on the other of it. But make no mistake, again, exaltation is about family. It's everything that the gospel teaches. All right, then we get the concluding speaker of conference on Sunday afternoon, President Oaks, president of the Quorum of the 12 as of this recording. And he goes right back to the family proclamation and how essential it is. And I know that some people don't like hearing this. I know people, really good people, that don't want to hear about the family proclamation because they don't participate in it in the same way that they would like to. I get it. We are in a broken, fallen world. And we have an opportunity to hold it up. We must hold up the ideal, even if you're not part of that ideal. You can be at some point in your life, in this life or in the next life. You will be, if that's what you choose. But even if you are not in that situation, we must uphold the ideal.
My loving brothers and sisters, thank you for your prayers in my behalf. I have felt them. The doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints centers on the family.
I'm going to stop right there, right? That this is what he's going after right here. The doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints centers on the family. Now, doesn't it center on Christ? It does. Of course it does. But when you understand the gospel, you understand that the family and the doctrine of Christ are intertwined and they are inseparably connected. You cannot extract one from the other. Because the whole purpose, the fullness of the atonement is for us to attain exaltation. Right? That is the whole purpose of the atonement, which is the good news, which is the gospel. The gospel, the good news, is that you can obtain exaltation. And exaltation is a family affair. You cannot pull those apart.
Essential to our doctrine on the family is the temple. The ordinances received there enable us to return as eternal families to the presence of our Heavenly Father. As of the April 2025 General Conference, President Russell M. Nelson.
Okay, now he's talking about temples here because they are also part of this whole idea of family. And not just your own personal family, but the entire family of God. And when you go back and look at the restoration, what was missing, right? You before Joseph Smith ever even gets the gold plates, right? Before he begins translating the Book of Mormon, what is given to him? What is talked? What does Moroni quote for him? He quotes Malachi 4. Along with 3 also, parts of it at least. But he quotes the last 2 verses of Malachi 4, which interestingly are the last 2 verses of the Old Testament. Right? The hearts of the fathers turning to the children, the hearts of the children turning to the fathers. So before anything ever gets started, before the Book of Mormon gets moving, before the church is organized, this is the purpose of everything. The sealings and the work that is done in the temple are manifestations in a physical body that we can do by proxy to help others obtain what they need to obtain for exaltation. It's not like, wow, well, you didn't do this, so therefore you're not going to be exalted. No, the point is that there has to be a physical manifestation, just like baptism. You need some type of a physical manifestation in a live physical body to demonstrate the act of acceptance. It is crucial. It is vital. It is a requirement to have these things done. And before Joseph Smith moves on with everything else, Moroni is already revealing this. And if you think about your temple experiences, you go through it from what would be baptism and confirmation, and then moving in through the washing and anointing and the endowment, and then the sealings, right? Then you're talking about a family affair there. That's what the whole thing moves toward. It all moves toward this idea of a family being sealed together. That's the covenant path. You don't root that out and say, well, this is just commentary. This is just a fad and things will change soon. It's everything. It is God's plan, period.
The Family Proclamation, announced exactly 30 years ago, declares that the family is ordained of God and is central to the Creator's plan for the eternal destiny of his children.
Central to the plan.
It also declares that God's commandment for his children to multiply and replenish the earth remains in force.
Okay, we're going to get to this in a minute, all right, because he's going to give a very important remark here that it cannot come from anywhere else to mean what it needs to mean than from the leader of the church.
And we further declare that God has commanded that the sacred powers of procreation are to be employed only between man and woman lawfully wedded as husband and wife.
It has always been that way, yes, even during the polygamous 19th century. I'll get to that in a minute.
As then Elder Russell M. Nelson taught a BYU audience, the family is, quote, pivotal to God's plan. In fact, a purpose of the plan is to exalt the family, end of quote. The Church of Jesus Christ is sometimes known as a family-centered church. It is.
I love that. You see how emphatic he is when he says it. It's sometimes known as it is, he says. He wants that firm. We understand the essential role of family. And look, it is as the Family Proclamation itself states, it's not just for the church. It's for all of civilization. When you tear apart the family, when you put identitarianism above it, when you put a pride agenda above it, which seeks to diminish or completely destroy the traditional family, then calamities will reign supreme. And that's true of anything, because family is what helps support any civilization.
We can truly say that the gospel plan was first taught to us in the counsel of an eternal family. It is implemented through our mortal families, and its intended destiny is to exalt the children of God in eternal families.
That is awesome.
Despite that doctrinal context, there is opposition. In the United States, we are suffering from a deterioration in marriage and childbearing. For nearly 100 years, the proportion of households headed by married couples has declined, and so has the birth rate. The marriages and birth rates of our church members are much more positive, but they have also declined.
Okay, something on this here. He says the last 100 years. Well, there's two things that have happened in this. And they work simultaneously against the family. One is the mists of darkness, right? The religion of academia, because that I call it that, even though I love many academics and I love so much scholarship and I study so much scholarship. But the religion of academia is where it is the idea of destroying family and every pernicious type of doctrine and philosophy of man that comes to us through our culture almost always foments within the halls of the humanities in the universities. And so you've got the religion of academia that pushes radical feminism, that pushes identitarianism and a pride movement, that pushes gender ideology and critical theory, intersectionality. And these things have fomented in our universities. They've been put out into all of the institutions. There's been a reprieve from this to some degree since January of 2025 here. But they own the institutions. They own the media. They own, I'm talking about these cultures, these ideological possessions within each of these institutions. You know, the media, law, certainly education from the universities all the way down through K through 12 across the country. You've got that now pushing into religion you think would be a bastion to hold off on these things, and some do, but it's creeped into an awful lot of Christianity. And then, of course, the family, and we see that tearing families apart already, directly with the family. Those five institutions, Gramsci said early on, the early Marxist, who's responsible for what we might call cultural Marxism, is that he said we have to go in and take all five of those institutions to make a cultural change. And that's exactly what's happened. Secondarily, it's technology. We can't handle it. We don't handle it well. It does so many positive things, so many good things. But technology is almost always a provider of convenience, a remover of work. And I'm not saying it's all bad. I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back to even the 20th century with things. But the way we handle these things is not always good. And it takes away from the gender roles that we have. It takes away from the role of family. It takes away from family time. It takes away from everything that the Family Proclamation wants to help us produce. So technology and the myths of darkness, the philosophies of men, the religion of academia, have worked together to cause some serious problems over, as President Oaks says, the last 100 years. Now, I have had several episodes on the fertility rate or the birth rate and how it's falling within the church. Utah this year dropped, for last year, it dropped 10 spots among the 50 states. Now, I know there's a lot of imports, but that's not all that's going on. President Oaks here confirms that even though the church does a better job, or up a little higher, we are still following the same trend because young couples are not getting married early enough. They're not having kids early enough. And their focus isn't in those areas. That's a problem. And I know there are certain economic issues that we need to deal with, but nothing is more important than this. Get married, have kids, start a family, take on responsibility outside of yourself. You don't need the nicest cars. You don't need the nicest clothes. You don't need the nicest houses. You don't need to be able to flash up all your stuff up on Instagram. You need to be a husband and a wife and a father and a mother. And there is nothing more important than this. The scary thing is, as I put these episodes out, and I've talked so much about this because I believe it is by far the largest temporal threat to the world is the fertility rate right now, the decline of the fertility rate. It will cause economies to fail. It will cause war. It will cause contention. It is not good. But it's some of the lower viewed episodes I ever put out. Even though I hit it over and over again, I was like, okay, well, maybe people become more familiar with this and understand what's happening and what the consequences are. But the views are still always lower than the average on the channel. There's nothing more important temporally and honestly spiritually than family and creating a family and building a family.
It is vital that Latter-day Saints do not lose their understanding of the purpose of marriage and the value of children. That is the future for which we strive. Exaltation is a family affair, President Nelson has taught us. Quote, only through the saving ordinances of the gospel of Jesus Christ can families be exalted, end of quote. The national declines in marriage and childbearing are understandable for historic reasons, but Latter-day Saint values and practices should improve, not follow those trends. In my boyhood, 70 years ago, I lived on my grandparents' farm.
Okay, so he is now going to go on here, and I know you guys have all seen this, but he's going to go on and he's going to explain a couple things. And there's two lessons here that I get from this, right? He's going to talk about how he's on a farm. They had to work hard. They didn't have much. And his dad passes away, I believe, when he's 7 years old. And there's two things you learn here. Number one, they didn't have a lot. It's okay. They had a family, and they built a family based on what they had. And family was the most important thing. Not what their house was, not what their consumerism dictated in any way, as if that was going to dictate their happiness. And then he brings up the fact that his dad dies when he's 7 years old, and his grandfather steps in and says, I will be your father. As President Oaks explains it very emotionally. Because what he's going to do is President Oaks here and his siblings and his mother lost the ideal. You may not have the ideal. Maybe you've never been married. Maybe you're divorced. Maybe you've lost a spouse, right? He didn't have the ideal, but the grandfather stepped in, and as long as he could, and they created or mimicked the best they could the ideal. That's what has to be done. You support the ideal as best you can. The example I usually give is my own family. Right? My parents split when I was 6 years old. Two amazing human beings that could not live together. And my dad remarried, had 4 more kids. We had 3 with my mom, and then 4 more kids with my dad's second wife. And what do you do with that? Well, what you do with that is you try to create the ideal regardless, right? You don't try and create as much as you can. You try not to keep separate families. You try not to keep things. You try and build a large family. So I'm the oldest of 7. And all of those brothers and sisters are my brothers and sisters. And I've never seen that in any other way. That would be odd to me, very strange. You focus on the ideal. You teach and develop the ideal. And you help others move toward the ideal, even if you don't have it. Now that we've had these inspiring words from Elder Rasband and President Oaks, I want to go back to this Salt Lake Tribune article and just cover a couple of things with the underlying comments here already given by these 2 men. So again, the title here, opinion, after hearing the contrast here from Elder Rasband and President Oaks, you have the LDS Church's Family Proclamation is commentary, not revelation. That it is the document should be seen as part of an evolving debate about family, gender, and marriage that reflects the values of its era. Wow. Okay. So let's go over a couple of things here that I think are very important. He talks about how, first of all, this came out September 23rd, 1995 from President Hinckley at the Women's Relief Society Conference. It was only the 5th time in history, this is important to see, in history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that leaders had issued something called a proclamation. Now, since then, we've had a couple more. But before then, the genre was so little used and so little remembered that most Latter-day Saints could not name one. That's true. And then he goes in and he's going to try and diminish this again. In fact, many of those earlier efforts are now curiosities at best. One proclamation from 1865 even demanded the complete destruction of Lucy Mack Smith's biography of her son, church founder Joseph Smith. All right, hardly a position the modern church maintains. That's true. This is not about eternal truths. This was something they were probably battling with. My guess is, 1865. This is 5 years after the formation of the reorganized church. There was a rift there and things were going on there. I can see them putting out a proclamation on something like this. But what the Family Proclamation is eternal truth. It is different, and that's why it is important. That's why it has lasted these 30 years. That's why it's front and center for us 30 years later, and we have 2 talks given on this in General Conference in 2025, right? So he asked this, so that history raises an awkward but important question. What exactly is a proclamation? There has never been a clear answer to this. Sure, maybe there isn't. But we've been told several times that this is doctrine, okay? This is revelatory. Even though it happens in a political situation, it doesn't matter. This is the response, and this is the revelation that was received. And thirdly, that these are all based on doctrinal eternal truths. That's the difference, right? He says Apostle Boyd K. Packer once called the 1995 text a revelation. The church editors later scrubbed it. Whatever, we just had it again here in conference, that it was revelatory. That's what we were told by Elder Rasband. He says the 1995 proclamation is considered doctrine by today's standards, presenting itself as timeless truth, even while its contents reflect the shifting sands of church history. In the 19th century, leaders preached plural marriage as central to God's plan. I don't know that has really changed. I mean, we don't practice it, not fully in this life. We don't practice it, but both President Nelson and President Oaks were sealed to 2 women. That hasn't changed, right? That doctrine has not changed, to the regret of some of you listening. They believed marriage has been a man and a woman of the same race, refusing to allow interracial marriages. Okay, that's policy. Maybe they call it doctrine. They talked about a lot of different things and different doctrines and things that were going on. This is not the eternal truths of exaltation. It is very different. It is such a bad argument. This is brought up so many times, this idea with polygamy and race. They both fall apart. The proclamation's idea of equal partnership between husbands and wives would have sounded foreign to most apostles, maybe, but maybe not. I mean, you're trying to go back to before the 70s. I doubt you were even born before the 70s. There are several other things here. I recommend you go read it for yourself. Came out October 3rd, and see what he has to say. He says, if the Family Proclamation is not revelation, not scripture, and not unchanging doctrine, okay, it is revelation. And it is unchanging doctrine. Sorry, Taylor, it is unchanging doctrine. Then what is it? I'd argue it's best understood as commentary. That is not going to happen. And I heard even on a Mormon Land podcast from the Salt Lake Tribune, I think it was yesterday morning, it was the editor, I don't remember her name, I apologize. She was from Dialogue, and also Patrick Mason on there. They were, the editor of Dialogue was thinking, okay, I think to her regret that it would become canonized. It might. I don't know. I don't know if it'll be canonized or not. It doesn't matter. I mean, it would give it more oomph, certainly, if this was added into the Doctrine and Covenants. And it might be. But all of the truths are in there are eternal truths, right? This is not commentary. This is not the Midrash. This is not, let's just reflect on today's times. That's not what this is about. If you remove the truths from the proclamation, the doctrine inside the proclamation, you remove the entire gospel. It's done. It's over. The idea of exaltation is gone. And that's not going to happen. That is not going to happen, despite the push from perhaps middle management or from members of the church or from scholars or from others, the loud voices. It's just not going to happen. Just a couple more points here. He says, like all commentary, he's calling it commentary, it doesn't end the conversation. It sparks new ones. In 2019, President Dallin H. Oaks clarified that the proclamation's use of gender means biological sex at birth, as if he's restating something in different terms because he wants to reclarify and change the commentary. That's not what he's doing. What he's doing is reacting to people like you and those that support what you believe, because the religion of academia has tried to separate gender from biological sex. In 1995, before intersectionality exploded throughout the halls of humanities, it was, gender was for the most part, understood as sex. They're one and the same thing. And it wasn't even until earlier in the 20th century that there was some efforts to try and change this, real efforts that meant anything, and to separate them. That gender is what you feel or what you assign yourself, regardless of biology. So they're coming back responding to what is now becoming a more common term of gender being an opinion or a feeling. Not because they're adding different commentary to it. He finishes off saying, 3 decades on, the Family Proclamation may loom larger than any of its predecessors because it's built on eternal truths. But history is always commentary upon commentary. How it will be reinterpreted in the next 30 years remains to be seen. It will be reinterpreted in the next 30 years by scholars primarily. That's where it will start. And they will dissect it and minimize it and devalue it and do everything they can to fight against the traditional family and traditional marriage. The gospel is true. The family, the Church of Jesus Christ is a family-centered church. The gospel of Jesus Christ is a family-centered gospel. Everything the church does is to support exaltation. And what we get in the Family Proclamation are eternal truths of exaltation. Thanks for listening.